Okay, let's continue, dear students. We are still in the first week, so you are collecting information and stuff like that, and it is fitting in this first week to point at the fact that the slides are on Blackboard and that a newest version of the course description, version 3.4, is also on Blackboard, in which deliverable 1 deadline is a little bit postponed. In the previous version it was the 20th of January. So if you want to make notes, especially where it comes to the assessment form, this is the moment to actually do so. And let's go through that document. The assessment form is not just the carrier of a signature and a grade. It's not just an administrative tool to process a grade in Osiris. Osiris is the name of the grading system here in Utrecht. And to record and to comply with archive rules as a university pertaining to the proof that you actually performed in this program, etc. The assessment form contains 9 categories, and those 9 categories are discussed and reviewed by us as lecturers and professors and scholars, and we have developed a so-called rubric. A rubric is a piece of text that describes, and in my slides they will be yellow in the course description. It's yellow in version 3.4, and those texts describe the components, the aspects of your thesis that results in the highest grade, a 10. So the language of that rubric, so the orangish, yellowish language is the rubric and is an attempt to catch in words when we are impressed on the category of research question, research methods, argumentation, style, structure, these type of categories. And that means that in the remaining 40 minutes we go over these texts and interpret them as instructions, as tips, as guidelines for you to actually make your thesis. And let's do that. The grading is not very interesting. A 10 is the best, a 6 is the minimum, and then we have fractional grades like a 8.1 or a 7.6, and that is important when you wish to graduate with the addition cum laude. Yes, Finger.
How many people managed to get a 10 last year?
We are in a country where the grading is somehow not in line with international traditions and standards. So most of the countries on the globe, the talents, the highest 20% gets an A or equivalent, and then a B and a C, and that's sort of the end. And here we have a non-defendable tradition, but I cannot force my colleagues that somehow an 8 is perceived as a high grade, which in language is good, which is not the same as excellent. So we are a little bit ashamed of that tradition, and that is one of the reasons that we not even keep track of the number of your question. We don't know. but not many. Let's say 0. Yeah. But I'm still young and ambitious, so this will change one day. But not in your LLM. However, the cum laude is something to go for, and that's a program-brought achievement. And sometimes you need, with the 15 credits at the end, not a 7.4 but a 7.7. And then, politely and discreetly, establish a channel of communication with your grader, with the framing, if in a reconsideration in the light of the cum laude there is some room, I would appreciate that, language like that. And so that is something we can achieve, but the 10 I cannot promise. But I frame it as such, and the rubric basically suggests that when you hit all those items, that you then deserve our ultimate glory and appreciation and so. In the back, fingers. This.
What's the grade point average that you have to get cum laude?
Cum laude, what the average you need is an 8 across the year. But there in the exam regulation it's a little bit more fine-tuned, but this is roughly bottom line.
Could you just clarify the pass mark 6 and then within brackets says 5.5?
Yes, so the so the 5.5 is the pass threshold, but to avoid confusion, for the thesis the exam regulation says that it is a 6 as a threshold.
So the total has to be 6 basically?
Yes.
But each deliverable can be 5.5 as long as the average is 6 by the end of it?
The good news is that there's only one grade.
No, but I meant for like the deliverables, like the preliminary...
They are not graded.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Because they are part of this sort of process, and the proposal is a pass or fail. There's 2.5 credits. Yeah, good questions.
I'm not sure if you mentioned that before, but will it be presentation that this is afterwards?
Say it again, will it be?
A presentation of the thesis?
No. The question is, will there be a presentation, oral presentation, PowerPoint? The answer is funny enough, Utrecht University does not have that as a tradition. And that is a pity, because by the time, so one of the experiences is that by the time you hand in your thesis on June the 30th, you know what your story was. And it would be a good tradition to allow you in 50 minutes to actually tell that. Because that's always much better than the text. And lifts the grade in all the institutions I worked with. However, that's not part of the tradition. So, to be honest, it's a little bit autistic at the end. Because there are no classes. Each of you are somewhere on the globe, emailing the thingy. And that's it. But the good news, in the fall 2023, we meet again at the graduation. Yeah. Let's move to, and this is not the last time we will discuss grades. Don't worry. But it is important. Thanks for all the questions. Let's do the first category, the category of the research question. And the slides are on Blackboard and the assessment form and the course description. It starts with a sub-sentence, to a large extent independently, bracket, with some feedback, etc. This already means that we are only giving some feedback. pertaining to the research question. If you ask for more feedback, then the rubric and the sort of thinking works as follows, that it is more than some feedback, so you are less achieving the goal of this category, and that results in a lower grade. And then the question is, what is some feedback? The good news is that the assessment form is the perspective of the supervisor, meaning that whatever I do in these lectures, and colleague Portova and Guantas, and in the tutorials, that does not count. So make sure that in all the other events other than your sessions with your supervisor, you collect as much feedback as possible. Of substantive lectures, Gavin, name them, in the breaks, with coffee, without coffee, and that does not count in terms of the grading mechanism. Meaning that by the time you meet your supervisor, you are already knowledgeable about the definition of a research question, which we cannot deal with tonight, but in the coming weeks we will touch on it. It's a complicated topic, but whatever it is, you have drafted it, meaning that you produced a text. We will exercise it in the tutorials, but you will do more often, among others, in the substantive courses. Because you have to produce all kinds of midterms and essays, etc. And they all have, at least implicitly, but preferably explicitly, some form of a research question. So, this one you will manage. And then, the research question, the project, needs to be feasible. Feasible means that it's possible to finish on June the 30th. Then the research question needs to be delimited, needs to be with boundaries. So the research question, how to produce peace on the globe, is not delimited. And this is where you can do some tricks. Thinking of the topic proposal, then taking 1/10, and then taking 1/10. And one of the manners to show that it is a delimited research question is to include a piece of legislation in the research question. And then not the Treaty on European Union, but Article 27, paragraph 3, sub D, of the regulation interpreting regulation this and that of 2011. Because then when you read it, that feels like, ooh, this is delimited. And so try to find a textual avenue to bring all these items and keywords out. Make it explicit. Feasible, include in your proposal a line, preferably include all these words in your text and your proposal, as in my delimited or my limited research question is, and my research project is feasible because by June the 12th I will be done and this and that. And so include these words. Then, comma, precisely formulated. You will re-articulate your research question until June the 29th. In light of the criterion precisely formulated. So that's a continuous balancing act with verbs and nouns and numbers and question marks or not and these types of codes and language part. And it must be thorough. And that's probably the most complicated one. What is thorough? What is synonym maybe deep, maybe innovative, and these types of words. Second sentence. In the context described above, it has some added value. So there is some added value to your research question. So don't invent a new rocket, artificial intelligence, whatever theory. So some added value. And add these words in your proposal. May I propose the following research question that seems to add some value to the knowledge base of society. And then, comma, given the state of the art. So added value is that you add something on top of something else. That means that you have to describe somehow what the state of the art knowledge is in your field. And that is why we have the concept of a bibliography. That is not to torture you, but that is to force you to prove the state of the art. And then within the state of the art, a sentence of a scholar, a line of a member of parliament, a piece of case law, a memo of a United Nations body. So there are some ideas on your research question, and that is the state of the art, and you add something. As in, they are wrong, let me tell you how it would function, or these type of things. And then, punt, dot, the sub-questions elaborate on the parts of the main question and structure the research report. So apparently, we expect sub-questions, and they have a function. Not the function to have sub-questions, but the function to elaborate on the parts of the main question. Meaning that if the sub-question does not relate to the main question, it's not a valid sub-question. And that is very easy. So your research question has 20 words, okay, 30 words, of which 5 are material. And then in each sub-question, one of these 5 words return, literally. So you need to make this imbecile proof, as in our face as supervisor. As in that you expressly state a text like, with the following sub-questions, I will elaborate on the main question and assist in the structure of the report, the thesis, meaning that each chapter of your thesis is about 1 or 2 sub-questions. And then don't ask how many sub-questions are needed, because we don't know the answer. Because it depends on your research question. And sometimes, theoretically, if you limit your research question 100%, then you don't need sub-questions, because then your main question is already the proof of competence. So don't put too much weight on the sub-questions and take these words, in a sense, literal. Okay, then the second item is about gathering of scholarly information. Let's call it data. Again, independently. And then systematically, authoritative sources are selected. Why? To adequately explore the topic. So adequately means that it is sufficient to serve the purpose of exploring your topic. So adequately is not that you write a handbook on human rights in the first 100 pages of your thesis and then start your research project. That's not adequate. So adequate also has a sort of mathematical component, as in 2 pages, So 2 pages is probably adequate enough where it comes to one type of authoritative sources, being the exploration, the descriptive part. Then second sentence. The state of the art is identified in terms of what is known and what is not known. So most students have a half attempt at disclosing what is known, but please take the second step and point, in the light of your research question, what is not yet known. And that is obviously something you struggle with, because you feel young and inexperienced and who knows who solves your problem somewhere else. But you have language, as in, it seems to be a non-solved issue, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to claim it 100%. So use language to cover your ass in that sense, that you say, okay, I did not read everything out there, but on the basis of my adequate exploration, this seems to be not known, and here I am with my thesis. That's the whole idea. Next sentence, some adequate reflections are given on the substantive relevance, depth and argumentative value of the sources. So the ideal is that as a scholar, per source, you reflect on it. And we are lazy as jurists, because we regard solid sources of law, as in legislation, case law, doctrine, as authoritative, and the rest is sort of rubbish, and we don't reflect. But especially in this master, where we are on top of new developments where no one published on, we quite often need sort of descriptive sources, websites that describe a funny new invention where the library is silent. And then you need to reflect on these types of sources. As in, this website is produced by the company that created the technology, so obviously they only show the beauties and the good parts of the product. But now that it is the only source on the thingy, we need to use it. But we know who wrote it and guarantee until the front door type of reflection. And that is something crucial. Maybe recruiters of your future career look especially at this capacity, that you can critically assess sources, because that is what high-level jobs are about. And make it explicit. Tip, as of today, when you are collecting data in Zotero or other file systems, make a category of notes on reflection with a code. Source of law, website, the sort of hierarchy code. So that you don't need to do that by May for all the sources, but that you have that in advance. The method. There will be a whole lecture. Keyword, sufficiently explicit. Meaning that there should be a sub-paragraph on the method. So you are not allowed, so I'm just a lawyer interpreting a legal text. This is a legal text. And apparently you're not allowed to do what half of the scholars do, having an implicit method. Positive law, don't shoot the messenger. So it needs to be sufficiently explicit and functionally sound for a focused and objective answer to the main and sub-questions. And this is the beauty of methods. So the whole idea is that you have actually a question, not a cover-up to write about privacy and other handbook stories. So the whole idea is that you have an actual question where you need a method to reach to the answer. And that's the beauty of method. And remember this sort of core characteristic when we end up in the swamp of the legal profession discussing legal methodology, where there's a lot of confusion and misunderstandings and misery. But the ultimate bottom line is in this rubric. The method is the tool to get to your answer. That's the bottom line, and beautiful. And then, last sentence, this method is carefully executed. So don't write your method section in November, do your thing, and forget to change it to actually what you did in the next 6 months. So there should be a 100% match between what is shown in your thesis as a report of your research project and what you defined as your method. So if one of the methods, let's in easy words suggest as an example that you will collect some case law as part of your method. And then if there's no case law in the rest of your thesis, that's then not carefully executed. Actually, all of you on Monday, the 23rd, the 25th of June, all of you will rewrite chapter 1 100%. So the best thing you can do is to actually delete your first chapter on the 25th, then read your thesis, and then make an introduction to your actual thesis. That is the best thing you can do. And only 10% will do it, and they have 9s. It's a difference of one point in my experience. But it needs some guts to push the delete button, because you put some effort in that earlier version. All right. And now we come to the crown jewel, argumentation. And argumentation is a word used by Dutch intellectuals to indicate a process, a brain process, and to indicate that in the language inferences are made that produces the end feeling that your text makes sense. And in the English language, argument means many other things, including fighting. And ultimately, this is about logic, and we will discuss that next week. But intuitively, we have a sort of understanding that you have a question, and then you have a cluster of arguments, and they together form the answer to your question and result in your end conclusion. So this category, argumentation, is basically chapter 2, 3, and 4, if you have 5 questions, chapters. Chapter 1, introduction, chapter 5, conclusion, and you have 3 chapters left, 2, 3, and 4. So the category in the assessment form is basically the assessment of 3 out of 5 chapters, or equivalent if you insist on having other numbers of chapters, 3 or 7 or 10 or 13. Well, they need to be legally correct. They need to be convincing. They need to be capable of answering the main question. The source material is included in those argumentations, in those arguments. And here it comes. The argumentation demonstrates in-depth knowledge of the field. And this is the easy part. You know your stuff, and in this sense, a thesis is just an exam in the topic at hand. So one thing you should not forget is show off in your thesis that you understand what you talk about. And that requires some descriptive components. Not too much, but not too little. So don't start with, one day in world history the European Union was created, and it consists of institutions and legislative processes. No. But the thesis as such, through the eyes of the supervisor, functions partly as a sort of exam in that area. And it says, the arguments demonstrate in-depth knowledge of the subject. And that makes us happy, because in the start of the project you did not know all these details, and then you're one of us at the end of the project in terms of knowledge. And that makes us happy. So don't forget this part. And are adequately explained, relevant, coherent, and somehow original. Then, second item of the same category, the arguments are adequately placed in the scientific debate discourse on the subject. So, it's not just your argumentation, it's your argumentation as a sort of museum guide. So don't forget to put on some state-of-the-art paintings on the wall of your thesis that look down, as in Harry Potter, on your topic, moving, as an expression, as a translation of the criterion that they are placed, the arguments are placed in the scientific debate on the subject. And then, last but not least, to some extent, the scientific and social context is included in the argumentation as well as the international and multidimensional aspects. Well, in our master, this is a no-brainer, because all our topics have direct links with things that happen in society, by definition, almost. And they are multidimensional in the sense that there's this technological component, political science, legal science, so most of you attract knowledge, state-of-the-art knowledge from multi-disciplinary corners, and make that explicit.
Yes, I have a question. Is there a limitation on how many sub-questions you can have?
Question is how many, whether there's a limitation on the amount of sub-questions. Yes, they're by definition connected to the main question. And now that the main question is 10% of 10%, the sub-questions are also limited because there are not that many words in your research question. So anything between 2 and 5. But there are no official guidelines because it's independently done by you. That's a terrible reasoning, isn't it? We have to wrap up. Yeah, hang in, the rest. So, category 5 are the sources. This is the footnotes. Pick one standard and apply it. And have a fellow student check it. You know, dots, spaces, capital letters. A no-brainer. If you earn $4,000 a month in 1 year, the least you can do is have a proper footnotes. All right? Structure. The key thing here is that the conclusions of your whole story are mostly supported by the findings of the research. Crazy sentence, isn't it? Basically allowing some space for conclusions that are not based on your research, which is bizarre, but it is what the law says. And the structure of the thesis connects the different parts of the research report adequately. So ultimately, chapters are just a tool to assist in the reading. So ultimately, it's one big poem. And one way of looking at chapters is each free page, you make a new chapter. However, in the communication with supervisors, you're asked to produce some chapters. And then, just to give you an example how you could look at it in a simplified way, if you have 5 chapters, the first is the introduction, you write on June the 25th, and the last is the conclusion, the summary of the all, you write on the 26th. Then you produce 3 chapters. And one chapter is on the issue / technology. The next chapter is on potential rules of law that reflect on the issue. And the third chapter, substantive chapter, is your analysis, your combination of chapter 2 and 3, and the answer to your main question. So structure in that sense is very easy. Style and layout, proper English. Professionalism, meet the deadlines. Integrity, write your own text. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, take these rubrics, read them over and over again, include them in your own language, and show off. Structure, knowledge of the field, state of the art. So use those words. What we will do is look at argumentation and demystify that. And we will do that with a very old guy called Aristotle. He invented logic, and basically the rest of philosophy of science and history of science is a, as they call it, a footnote to the work of Plato and Aristotle. And some other approaches. We will say a few more things on when we advise you do what in the coming months, on top of what we already said today. And I call on you to apply for the honors program of the law school. Repeated call, the 19th of September deadline. There will be a legal writing support program, so keep the Blackboard and intranet environment in your eye, and that is a sort of additional class for some additional language support. And I have 4 hopes. 1, that you enjoy the first week. 2, that today and the subsequent RTT events somehow help. My third hope is that you excel in your thesis and that you are proving that you are pleasing yourself by doing it one step better than your previous theses and project. And so don't try to win the Nobel Prize, but take one more step from your personal perspective, at least. And I hope that all these tips and theories and talk will help to land you a job in 2 senses. One, in terms of the subject. So doing a research project helps you sharpen your brain what you actually like and helps you look for employment. And then, because of your knowledge of that topic, you will land a job in the Netherlands or abroad. Are there any questions right now? 1, let's take one question and acknowledge that it is very hot. and time. But one more question.
I didn't fully understand how you pick a supervisor. So do you pick someone and then email them and ask them if they're willing to supervise you, or is there like a list that you can choose from?
The question is how the matching with the supervisors work. One, there will be some meetups with supervisors on the 19th of December, so the last week prior to the season's holiday on the Monday. Then you will suggest and prepare your proposal in a certain direction, and then you wait and accept destiny, because then I do this matching, and that is a attempt to do a good match. And the reason that I'm optimistic is that you will rephrase your project anyhow. So maybe at first sight your match is not the desired match, but somehow it works out. So a little bit old-fashioned and not 100% a marketplace, but you can help me in the matching process. And there will be a list. Last afterburner. Yeah.
So are there different expectations for the thesis and for the honors program, or is it the same? Like, is the thesis more difficult, or is it the same, or are there new expectations?
No, that is different. So the honors program is a standalone thingy on top. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. See you next week.
That's the last burner.